Hey everyone, welcome to DeepThinker.io. Every Wednesday at this time, we talk about intriguing topics that are relevant to all of us, or of technology that is of interest. So, we had some great speakers the last couple of weeks. Gene Hoffman talking about his cryptocurrency and why that's different than Bitcoin. Then last week we had Vijay Sajja talk about the subscription economy, what's going on there. Today, we're taking on a huge topic, which is what's going on with the economy, the stock market, and then a little bit of history of that. So let me bring in our eminent guest speaker right now. His name is John Stoddenrouse. I've known John for a number of years. He's out in California where the forest fires and riots and tax rate and all that fun stuff as I sit here in sunny Austin. John has been a consummate investor throughout his whole life, win some, lose some, and then economist. So he and I have been talking about this topic, I don't know, 10 years. And so to keep the dialogue, explain what we're talking about. And so I want to go through a little bit of the history, a little bit of some definitions, and then a little bit of what we see the Fed's doing. And by the way, the Fed was live today, not giving us too much more than Jerome Powell saying he's going to print to infinity, and he's trying to perk up inflation a little bit, but nothing fascinating about that. So let me first start off with the concept of fiat currency. Fiat currency, something that's backed by a government, and the people believe there's trust in it. The U.S. dollar, for many of you, you should know, it used to be pegged to and backed by gold. And then in 71, Richard Nixon took it off the gold standard, which truly turned it into a fiat currency. The other concept just before, which winning the lottery, is after World War II, there was this thing called the Bretton Woods Agreement, where after the war, the U.S. was in a pretty good position and said the U.S. dollar is going to be what's known as the world currency. So a lot of countries pegged their currency against the dollar. When two countries that didn't necessarily trust each other, such as China and Russia, they would trade in dollars. And so we've had the luxury, and I mean luxury, of being the U.S. Reserve currency, and that is potentially in jeopardy as the Feds continue to print more and more money under what they call the MMT, modern monetary theory. And so I'm going to put John on the spot, ask him a bunch of totally incriminating questions like, is the consumer price index real? Is the unemployment number real? And are we still living in a purely capitalistic free market economy here in the U.S., or are we all servants? There you go, John.
A little too much to digest all at once. Let me take one step back. And, people say fiat currency, and I think, what the hell does that mean, fiat? And I thought that was a type of car, right? No. Yep. Well, no. Yeah. So fiat means decree, and it means the government decrees the currency to have value, even though it's a piece of paper. And why would even that name be necessary is that because previously, currencies got invented because they were backed usually by precious metals, gold, silver, or something else. So the whole idea that the world would run on fiat currencies is it's happened again and again. They always fail at some point.
Yeah, I've heard there's something like 1,500 fiat currencies, and only one has survived a long time, which is the British pound. But it's for convenience. I mean, if you want to buy and sell a hot dog or a hamburger or pay for parking, you have to trade something. You can't bring around an ounce of gold and shave off a little bit. So it was for convenience, I guess, right?
Yeah, but I mean, the British pound wasn't always a fiat currency. That's why it was called a pound. Pound of silver. So, I mean, it's fiat today, that's for sure. But none of them last very long. I mean, I guess you could say United States has lasted fairly long, 1971, but it's also been backed by something called the petrodollar since that time, which extended the life of the dollar. The real question now is what happens in the coming years? Is there any other currency to replace it, or do we go to a multi-currency system, which is what some people are saying, that it's a basket of currencies.
So why has people keep saying printing, but it's not really printing. They don't print paper. They just add zeros and ones. The Fed does. They give it to the central bank, and then it goes out in some form of credit or anything. So when we say printing, we don't physically mean printing. We just mean that the Fed's creating additional currency to the M1, M2.
Well, actually, they're creating reserves that the big central banks hold, and then they loan against the reserves. So
supposedly,
supposedly, right? or at very low rates. And so it's actually they're not printing and handing it to people like you and me. They're giving it out to these large central banks that then distribute through their networks super cheap loans because it keeps the interest rate low.
Yeah,
and then that's how the current printing QE is working or not working, right? So that's why they're talking about changing all this with MMT, UBI, is to get the money straight into the hands of the people that need it, because these big banks aren't getting it to the people that need it, which is why all the people at Goldman Sachs are becoming billionaires, and all the other central banks, large banks, excuse me.
The separation of wealth seems to be increasing exponential. I mean, the middle class doesn't stand a chance. The super rich and then the super poor who get by inflation. And when I said the consumer price has been manipulated so much that
Sure.
I know my insurance, health insurance, house insurance, gas, food costs seem to be up quite a bit, and they say that no, there isn't inflation. The CPI is, it's been flat.
Yeah, that's a joke. It's funny. Stan Druckenmiller, one of these famous billionaires, was on CNBC a couple days ago and said, "Oh, we might have 5 to 10% inflation in the coming decade, or something like that." I was like, "What a joke!" He should talk to one of his servants or one of his maids or butlers, because we all know it's like 5-10% today, and has been for years. But the thing is, those large banker types, to them, inflation, they're talking about bonds and stocks and things like that, not what you and I know to be true inflation, which is the fake CPI, or the cost of rent or cars or insurance, medical. Those are all going up and are going to continue to go up, either high single digit or double digit.
When anybody asks me, like, what's the most important economic factor, I always say jobs, because if people are working, they're paying taxes, they're supporting their family, it may not be a great job, but it's a job, it's money. And when you have high unemployment, there's a direct correlation to like petty theft, robbery, drug dealing, whatever. And so jobs are critical. And they're saying that the U.S. economy's unemployment rate is 8.4%. We have 30 million people on unemployment insurance, and of those who can work in the U.S. is about 150 million, because you got to take out children and under 6, over 7. My calculator works pretty well, and 30 million unemployed out of 150 million sounds a bit more than 8%. Why kid the general public on unemployment numbers other than a politician?
Yeah, the numbers are definitely played with. The real unemployment rate is much higher than what they're saying, and
getting worse.
And getting worse, absolutely.
Yeah, and
I think you're dead on. Having jobs is the core to solve the problem of what's going on in the country today, the riots, the unhappiness. Employment is key. It's needed. It's necessary. I don't think my opinion, it's MMT or UBI. They sound great. Sit home, do nothing. But I think employment would be a far better option for everybody.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's kind of nice to sit at home and get an extra check, but I think in the long run, everybody gets tired of watching Oprah Winfrey, all day long. But a lot of these jobs aren't coming back. So Yelp said 60% of their restaurants they track just said, look, they're not reopening. They're just walking away. And I used to be a landlord a long time ago, and I was living, mortgage payment to mortgage payment. I had a 8-unit complex, and I had a huge mortgage. And I can't imagine owning an apartment complex now where everyone gets to live there for free for a year. I don't even understand how that works. It seems to me like the property owner should just walk away if they don't have any equity. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's crazy times. I mean, that was what PPP was supposed to solve to some degree, if you could get it. But apparently that's run out and it's now stuck in Congress. It's being politicized. So not a great time to be a landlord, in my opinion, but
or commercial, or just commercial property with everyone working from home. Because my friend who worked at REI, they just sold their headquarters. REI sold their headquarters to Facebook up in Seattle, and then Snapchat paid $90 million to get out of a buy option of a building in San Francisco. $90 million to not build something. Without being a doomsday doom and gloom, I don't know, how do you look at these fundamentals of, Tesla being worth, I don't know, they were at one time worth $420 billion, worth more than every other car company on the planet, and Apple. There are no fundamentals that support the Dow and Nasdaq's continuing rise. And the party's got to end, I assume. COVID popped the bubble in March, but it just marched right back up to an all-time high with unemployment, with the printing of money, without a V-shaped recovery. If COVID couldn't pop this bubble, what will?
Well, definitely the stock market's disconnected from the economy, that's for sure. And the bond market is too, because the Fed's buying the bonds now at incredible velocity. So it's totally disconnected. It's going to continue to run up. It's not related to whether you have massive unemployment. It's more to with government policy. Now, what will stop it? It's a really good question. I wouldn't start buying puts on the Dow just yet.
No,
it's got more time to run, I would say.
No, I mean, Pete, I know some really famous investors still buying, index, S&P index, even though the S&P 500 is really 5 companies, not 500 companies.
With stretched PEs.
That are 4 or 5 digits. So 2001, 2000, we have a dot-com bubble burst. Kind of well explained. 2008, we had a housing crisis where we did credit default swaps of putting crappy mortgages that had zero down, interest only, held by people who couldn't make the payments. That blew up. Though I see how we can work our way out of those situations, but the current situation that we're in is very different. And this one, I'm just confused on how you get out of that. So I'll put up here on the screen, this is the U.S. debt clock for anyone who hasn't seen this. We're currently at 26.7 trillion, which if every taxpayer in the U.S. wrote a check for $215,000, we could get out of it, which is pretty highly unlikely. And this is a live clock, and you can see it's just, going through the roof here. It doesn't seem to be slowing down. The Fed said they're going to do this quantitative easing or printing forever. I don't know how we get out of this. And this didn't start with COVID. Everybody keeps blaming COVID. I was watching the overnight repurchase agreements that were happening in, last September. And the Feds were sneaking in, putting in billions overnight just to keep the repurchase, plumbing going. So, COVID should have been a perfect storm. We should have had a correction if it was a free market economy, which it's not. So everything's backstopped by the feds. They're printing like crazy. What wall do we hit next? If a pandemic doesn't do it,
well, we're not done yet. We're not done yet with the pandemic. So in terms of the debt, there's only a couple ways out, right? We can, as a country, we can default and not pay our debt, and the U.S. dollar gets replaced by something else. We can inflate our ways away, which is what the current Fed policies are leaning towards and openly saying they want inflation, right? And then the other, like, less probable pixie dust way out would be that our economy becomes fantastically productive. We become the leaders of innovation, and we grow our way out and pay off this debt.
Like World War II. I mean,
exactly.
We were building cars, we were building trains and boats,
and the rest of the world was on its knees, and we were, the producer, maker of many things, and supplier. So there's only three ways out. One of them doesn't seem like it's going to happen this time. So is it default or inflate? I think they're going to try. It could be a little bit of both too, by the way.
You start with the
inflation, and that's not quite enough. And then so you start defaulting, or major default. And so it could be a combination of both. Probably is.
Well, it seems like that is the most highly probable, given that regardless of the presidential outcome, there's no way Trump or Biden can fix this problem. That's not going to solve it. No politician is going to impose austerity unless you have a gun to your head. And so then we get into hyperinflation, which robs the common citizen.
Which is austerity, only it's on a stealth mode.
Yeah. So a loaf of bread is $20, a gallon of gas is $10, and oh, by the way, your wages didn't increase at all.
Right.
And so that seems to me like a 99.9% probability.
It seems likely.
And so, okay, so that plays out, let's say, in 2 or 3 years, and so then you get civil unrest, people more rioting or whatever, and then what happens? The Fed steps in and says, okay, we're going to make currency illegal. We're going to be on the Fed coin, Fed buck, and just dollars go away, and now we're just going to wipe out all the debt with some magical new currency and do a do-over? Is that what happened with Weimar Republic and Zimbabwe and Argentina? How do you do a do-over?
Well, a do-over could, in the case of Germany and the Weimar Republic, that ended with a war, and the war was the do-over, and that sort of wiped the slates clean, and their currency started over, as did the whole world. In our case, it could end the same way. It's impossible to say how exactly it will go.
But what creates the war based on the economy thing? Because right now, we were in a fairly globalized trade economy. There was global trade, and now it's pulled back to whoa. We need to back up to our supply chain, and we can't rely on China for all of our pharmaceuticals, and we can't rely on everybody. So it seems that more and more industries are being pulled back to the U.S. Good thing, bad thing.
Well, that's a conversation right now. That's not a reality, right? Our trade deficit, we just hit the largest trade deficit we've ever had. So it's a dialogue now for the first time, and it hasn't been previously. So politicians and the media are starting to talk about, we should be able to make our own N95 masks, and maybe we need some antibiotics produced in America. Maybe we don't have to beg the Chinese for a shot of penicillin. So that's only a dialogue, though. It hasn't happened, and I wouldn't say that decoupling's even other. And depending on who gets elected, it may go the other way. We may continue to send all of our jobs to China.
So I heard a really funny comment from Peter Schiff. Is Peter Schiff or Ray Dalio who said about 60 cents of every dollar that the federal government spends is money they printed or created out of thin air, and 40 cents, 40%, came from traditional tax money. And he goes, "What the hell? Why not just print the other 40 and just do away with taxes? You know, get rid of taxes and print the whole thing.
Yeah,
Why not?"
I've heard that before. Why does any politician need to talk about raising taxes when, no one's paying their bills anyway at the federal level, so just pay more.
Print the rest.
Print the rest until the whole thing blows up.
Seems to be an interesting campaign slogan. Say no taxes for anybody ever. We're just going to print it.
Free medical, free social security,
free school,
everything's for free schools, and no taxes. Right? It's kind of what we're trying to do.
Well, that's what's happening today. I mean, it's so the Republicans are more liberal and democratic than ever before, and I don't. So the political parties, everybody's swung to the all hands on deck, too big to fail, bail everybody out. And then one comment you and I discussed briefly before we went on the air here was 10 years ago, if 10 years ago or 15 years ago, if you had $1 million and you bought a treasury bond, it would produce about $70,000 a year in interest. And back 10 or 15 years ago, you could live on 70 grand a year. You could live modestly. If you take that same theory today, you need at least $10 million of U.S. Treasuries to produce the same 70 million in annualized interest income to live on. But that 70,000, there's no way you can live on it like you used to. Yeah. And so to think like, okay, how much money do I need to retire now? Every day that goalpost is moving so far away from those people who think that their 401 and Social Security is going to take care of them. I mean, Social Security is going to be inflated away. A steep market correction is going to have your 401k be a 201k or a 101k. And I think, a lot of the boomers are going to be working for a really long time. And I don't know if this is, sunk in with anyone yet. And again, I just see that's where it's going.
There's no question that the Fed's policies have been, everything you just said is the Fed's policies are robbing savers. People who have been saving their money are being robbed. They're being robbed of their yield. They're being robbed of the value of the underlying savings, and they're being pushed out on the risk curve. They're being told, go buy stock, go buy Tesla, go buy something flim flam, and maybe that'll give you the returns you need to survive and not live on cat food and dog food. But the policies are continuing, and Powell today said they're going to continue on to no raises in rates, no interest is going to be on those loans, those treasuries you're talking about for years to come.
So did this happen in Japan, and aren't we kind of turning into a Japan where I could borrow money at next to nothing, and then I just buy S&P 500, and the delta is a profit?
Japan isn't people do point to it as, they're the leaders in here. There's some certain things that don't apply to Japan and to the United States. First of all, their debt is fully self-funded within their country, whereas we live off the good graces, or we traditionally have, taking debt from other countries, like
by China. selling bonds to China. Okay.
Exactly. And
so nobody was buying Japanese.
Well, they might be buying it, but they're not necessary. They've got they run trade surpluses, whereas and large ones at that. So they're very efficient in what they do, and they can. I'm not saying it's a great way to run your economy or that there isn't a better way, but it's just apples and oranges to what we are. We have not only a massive trade deficit, we also have these giant Fed deficits.
Right.
So they don't have the twin deficit problem. And so it's just not comparable, to be honest. They produce a lot of very high quality things that are sold throughout the world, and their companies make big profits, whereas we've been sending all that overseas for 20 years. To the point where we can't even get an N95 mask we still can't get N95 mask, in case you don't know, even though it's a Honeywell product. So we've driven ourselves either, to the precipice of the cliff or off the cliff, depending on your perspective.
So back in the 80s, we did have hyperinflation. I vaguely remember I was too young to own a house or something, but weren't mortgage rates like at 17, 18, 19% for a home mortgage? We survived that somehow, right?
Well, I wouldn't call it hyperinflation. I think it was the 70s, but it was double digit. It was double digit. Hyperinflation to me is triple digit. I know there's probably some serious definition that everyone would go by, but Venezuela, countries like that are having, inflation of 5,000% a year. That's hyperinflation. Weimar Republic. Like, nobody in this country uses a wheelbarrow of money, even in the 70s, to go pay for a loaf of bread, which is what you had in the 1930s in Germany. So we had severe inflation problems, recognized inflation problems, but not hyperinflation. I lived through those inflation times, and I can tell you, you could feel it even as a little kid. You could see it and understand it and feel it. You go to buy that piece of pizza at one time was 25 cents, literally, it sounds like ancient history, but and the next week you go there and it was 35 cents and the Coke was separate.
Right.
So people are going to feel this when it hits, and it's going to hit. Because I believe we're going to, back to that debt clock, we're going to inflate our way out, or at least try to. I mean, that's what the Fed says. That's what the government says they're doing. So I believe them.
But it's how can Jerome Powell and, I guess everybody's in office or in their job for some finite period of time, and so I'll kick the can down the road. I'll make my constituents happy. I'll say the right things as a politician, but our children, our children's children, they're going to inherit. Let's not even talk about climate change and other issues, but I don't see how you get off that slippery slope of inflation and printing money. It's a drug addict on heroin, and those never end well. And that's what we are. We're heroin addicts on printing money.
Yeah.
And
at some point, it's called the crack up boom, and it will hit. It will happen. Who knows when? And then the whole system has to reset. Debt jubilee. Probably a change in our constitution, if not entire government, and that could be happening sooner rather than later. I mean, you say COVID, maybe is that the pin that popped this bubble, or maybe the election or failed election? A lot of people, we're not out of 2020 yet.
Yeah, and I see cash going away because they're saying a lot of stores are saying, "Oh, cash is carrying the COVID disease, so you got to get rid of it." When in fact, the government would love to get rid of cash because then they can keep an eye on how much you spend. Are you properly paying taxes? Are you paying your landscaper under the table? And so, if you get rid of cash, and I'm not talking about going to Bitcoin, it's just use your plastic, use your debit and credit for everything. And so you could get rid of cash. And I think most of the millennials aren't using cash anyways. They use, a debit card to buy a $1 purchase.
You get a speeding ticket, they can just suck it right out of your account. You don't even
you could just,
or more nefarious thought is you don't get the new DNA modifying vaccine on schedule, and you can't spend any cash until you go get your vaccine. That's coming, unfortunately. At least that's the plan.
So we've got just a minute or so left. To preserve wealth, if you happen to be lucky enough to have any right now, it seems like real tangible assets, whether it be real estate, whether it be precious metals, that seems like a logical place to hide. And you and I have talked about this quite a bit too. So great, you're middle class. You take your money out of 401k. shit, if my house is paid for, why don't I finance it at 2% and go buy gold and, bury it in the backyard? And so it, it, it seems like a wise thing to do, but you can't eat gold, you can't eat silver. It's going to be really hard to trade and exchange it for a loaf of bread. It's not going to gain wealth. It protects your wealth, but its fungibility, tradability, transactability looks like it will be really tough. So, okay, great. You've just hoarded, 10 pounds of gold, and the system fell apart. Great. What do you do now?
It's conceivable they outlaw gold and you either turn it in or it becomes dynastic wealth that gets, handed off to your children's children. Maybe they can sell it or leave the country and sell it. I think everyone's situation is different. I think the real thing for most people would be pay off expensive debt, like don't have credit card debt if you can.
Right.
Buy canned food if you're really on the other end of the spectrum. Precious metals is only really for people that have wealth to protect and to put aside. It may or may not apply, and it may be outlawed, which it was before.
Yeah.
So that's only one. Foreign stocks are another place to go hide that still pay dividends and have good, reasonable PEs if you're slightly more sophisticated. It's definitely, debt's not necessarily your friend. Maybe if it's house debt at a low interest rate and you don't think they're going to change the terms and conditions on that, it might be okay. I wouldn't I wouldn't go more debt. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. And it's funny you bring up like cans of food. You and I have talked about this in the past. I don't think we're going to go hungry. I just think there's going to be a supply chain disruption where you may have to wait 3 hours to get into Costco and half the shelves are empty. Or when you get in there, you're only allowed to buy 2 cans of soup because they limit it. And so augmenting supplies in case of a supply chain disruption where you say, look, I don't have 3 hours to wait in line at a grocery store.
We saw some of that already with COVID-19 here in Silicon Valley.
And that was just with toilet paper.
Well, there was no produce at certain stores, and there was reduced cans, and there were empty shelves. So it could happen again. Now, the other thing that might happen is discontinuity of your stock markets. If there's this crash, then the stock market might be crashed for a while, as well as your banks. So you need to give some thought to that. That's happened plenty of times in the past and into other countries, Cyprus and places like that. So just food for thought that you may not be able to go to your cash machine and get cash.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, terrific. So we're at the bottom of the hour. A lot of food for thought, more, on the cautionary side of things to come to give people a chance to go do their own research. Neither John nor I are giving financial advice. We're not financial advisors. We're not telling you how to invest. So I don't think we're portraying ourselves as that, but we're trying to portray ourselves as realistically what might be coming. Now, whether it's 2 months from now or 2 years from now, the trajectory seems obvious. The timing does not. I don't know if you'd agree with that, John, or not.
Yeah, for sure. And it's to our pre-conversation, it's not pessimistic or optimistic view. It's kind of like the way things evolve. It's evolution, and if people view it as half glass empty, well, sorry, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's happened before, so
exactly.
Cool. Well, great. We'll leave it there, and thanks everyone for joining in. This will be available for rebroadcast on the various social platforms, and certainly I'd like to thank my guest, John Stoddenrouse, for engaging conversation on the economy and what our feds think is the right thing to do. We'll see what happens.
Thanks, Charles, and have your people call my people, please.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Okay. Thanks,
Bye
everyone. Cheers.